Hey, well, we are live, and I'm seeing a few of you joining in, which is awesome. Thanks for joining me. I'm alone again in the lock-in, which is our little writing recording space here at Mushroom Music in Sydney. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation tonight. I don't know about you guys out there wherever you are, but I know that I definitely could use some really good tips on mental health right now. It's a very weird time. Hey, Errol. So I'm really looking forward to chatting with Mary tonight. Hey, Linda. It's going to be a really important conversation. A lot of stuff that we can cover. Obviously, it's a really strange time for a lot of us, whether we're working in the music industry, whether we are artists ourselves, or whatever our personal situation might be. Just waiting for Mary to jump on in, and hopefully we can get started. Wow, heaps of you already tuning in. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, Mary is the Mary is the founder of the Indigo Project, which is a progressive psychology practice here in Sydney, in Surrey Hills, and she does a lot of work with creative people, with artists, with musicians, but also with engaging creativity and using music as a therapeutic tool. They have a lot of workshops that they do using music, and also a project called Indigo X, which is basically like an immersive experience, which Mary can tell you a bit more about in a couple of minutes, which, like I said, uses music in kind of incredible ways to create these immersive experiences. But I'll let Mary do the talking about that because she's the expert and I'm just the music guy here to hopefully facilitate and have a good time with you guys. So I'm going to add Mary in now. And hopefully this works.
Here I am.
Hey!
Hey.
How you going?
Oof, that's a bit of a loaded question at the moment.
It's a very loaded question. Where are you at
Yeah.
home at the moment?
I am at home. I would have to say I'm feeling pretty unsettled. A lot of kind of nervous energy and restlessness. And just sort of feeling kind of sad about the world and the state that it's in, and just the challenges that I think that all of us, not just artists and musicians and creatives, this kind of collective kind of challenge that we're all facing at the moment.
It's such a strange time. And I think like, well, at least for me personally, like the first week, I think you just went into that kind of bit of an adrenaline state and was like, okay,
Totally.
like keep things going, like get things happening, keep work happening, keep my kid alive, keep food on the table. And then it's sort of, I've definitely noticed I've gone into a bit more of like a suspended reality, what's
Yeah,
going on, anxiety raised kind of state. And
totally. Like I remember talking to, my team a couple of weeks ago, and, in a huge staff meeting on Zoom, and I was like, I think I'm feeling weirdly okay. And then literally 2 weeks later, I was in the same kind of meeting and just saying, I don't think I'm feeling that good right now. And, I think the beginning was just all about being productive and getting, switching the business and doing everything that we can. So there was like so much to do and so much to deal with. But I think when the dust kind of settles a little bit, you're kind of left with your own thoughts
yeah,
and emotions, and not having, the ability to express that as much or connect with people or get outside or dance and, be with people and groups of people and be kind of distracted from it. It's definitely sitting, a lot more like very physically in the body right now.
yeah, for sure. I think also not having that end date, like often, you'll go through, traumatic experiences or negative times, but there's usually kind of some sort of like, oh, I'll just get through this really crappy project or get through this tour or get through this whatever, and there's an end date, whereas this sort of feels like, okay, and now this is life for How
Who
long exactly?
knows? The funny thing is like, uncertainty is is a certainty anyway in our lives. But I
Yeah,
think that we've really built a lot of structures around ourselves to have a sense of control, which probably a little bit is an illusion that's been kind of sort of like ripped off us at the moment, that we have a sense of control and we know what's happening in the future. But if we kind of really think about it, we've never really had that much control, and we're always kind of sitting in the reality of what was uncertainty for all of us anyway. So
yeah.
yeah, I think the veil's kind of lifted on this, on all the ways that we make sense of our worlds and put things into place to make sure that we're not with our minds too much.
100%. Well, you're talking to a control freak, and I can't tell you, my Dyson has gotten so much of a workout. I'm just trying to take control over the things I can. I'm like, okay, yeah, I'll just vacuum for the 20th time because it's something I can definitely do. Get rid of the dust.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I'm about to clean underneath the bed. So, every drawer in the house has pretty much been organized a couple of times. And that felt really good until you kind of run out of stuff to organize. And, I think eventually it's just inevitable that we're going to have to sit with all these feelings that are coming up for us.
Yeah. Well, before we delve into some of those feelings, for people that might not know you or know about the Indigo Project, can you just tell me a little bit about, your background and sort of where you're coming to this conversation from?
Yeah, well, I guess the Indigo Project is a, progressive psychology practice, mental health organization, and its purpose really is to speak directly to people. So I think in the past, therapy, therapists, psychologists, mental health, there's a lot of stigma around it. There's a lot of preconceptions about what psychologists are. There's a fear, I think, around seeing a therapist. And, Indigo was really about taking a creative approach to mental health, and kind of came from my work with street kids. So that's kind of where I started my career. And, being a psychologist, working with street kids, you learn pretty quickly that you've got to be real, otherwise you might get a chair thrown at you or something. So there's no space for like knowing everything. There's no space for like telling people what to do. There's no space for being like the professional, the scientist, and coming from that place. It has to come from the heart, and relationships are ultimately so important. If you want to connect with someone, well, you got to be real. You got to be human and just be like, I'm a bit of a mess. I don't really know what I'm doing a lot of the time. And we've got to be real about just the challenges that we have as human beings, which I think people think that therapy and psychology is about, like, I've got to have a diagnosis. I've got to, I only go if things are really up shit creek. And it's when everything is like completely the worst. But I think what Indigo has been trying to do is really shift that perception of therapy being a last resort and being about diagnoses and and more about, hey, we all struggle with the mind. We're all kind of vulnerable. We haven't had the tools to deal with relationships. We're all trying to figure it out, and life is a little bit messy, and so are we. And I think if we can start that conversation, it just helps people to feel like what they're going through is normalized. And so taking a creative approach is really important, because it's something that people have shied away from, I think.
Right. And it's like, I guess that background definitely makes sense, but as well, like, did you always have a creative approach towards your thinking or towards this practice? Were you always kind of engaging with, I guess, art or music or creativity in some way? Was that just a natural thing for you?
Well, it was actually really weird, because when I was working with street kids, I, took a creative approach. So I brought in friends who were in the music industry, DJs, hip hop dancers, like graffiti artists, songwriters, and we kind of held workshops for young people. Right. And that's where, that's where all the barriers come down, and people just can be real, and we can talk about music and drugs and, you know, what it's like to be young. And, you know, that's what kind of like our conversations are like with our friends. We're not like, okay, I'm going to go and have a really serious chat. We, you know, we just kind of loosen up with just talking about everyday things. And I think that's what came into Indigo was, you know, let's use music to teach people about their minds. Let's find a way, you know, how do we get people's attention when everyone's like, well, let's just go for a drink after work, or there's plenty of entertainment. There's plenty of things to do, you know, to not sit with yourself. So, you know, using music in a way where people can, you know, learn the therapeutic ways in which they can use music to change their state of mind, and how music can trigger different emotions and how we can use that to kind of for better well-being. So I guess I never really thought that I was super creative, and that's why I brought all my friends in. And then I realized, you know, kind of everyone has, you know, this creativity within themselves. And I think it's a really beautiful thing to ignite, because if you think about it from a therapeutic perspective, we're ultimately learning how to be creative in how we want to live our lives. So I think that's the ultimate form of creativity, whether you have, you know, you sing or make art, you're making art out of your life, and you're basically writing a book that you hopefully want to read about your life.
What is it? I mean, obviously a lot of artists have built careers around this idea of art connecting and art being a thing that can break down barriers and move people. So it's something that obviously we're very familiar with in the creative industries. But what is it about art, or even maybe music specifically, that does help bring barriers down for people when you're dealing with therapy, or even just getting to those vulnerable conversations? What is it about art that helps remove those walls and barriers?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been involved in research for the last 3 years about how we use music, not just in one-on-one therapy, but in kind of groups. And what we found is, like, particularly when I started experimenting using music in one-on-one sessions, I found that, you know, how it moved people was in a way that talking couldn't necessarily trigger. And it had an ability to trigger emotions and also hold a space for people to explore emotions without feeling like they were unsafe. So in a way, it's like a container, and it's a direct way right into people's hearts, and it allows people to feel and express emotions that typically, you know, if, you know, being a therapist, when people come into therapy and they start feeling stuff, they start apologizing for feeling or for crying, and they say, oh, you know, I'm sorry for crying. But if you give people that container, and give people permission, then what we found is that we can actually trigger all different types of emotions. And this is going back to an idea that feeling a whole range of emotions is what predicts good mental health. So we would typically think, if I want to feel good, I'm just going to feel good, and I'm going to put on, for example, happy music and feel good. But what we're actually finding through our research is that feeling this whole kind of journey of music that we've kind of structured for people actually allows people to kind of feel the full range of their emotions. And that is actually what helps people to feel better. So it's about kind of coming to and exploring things that we typically avoid, which, you know, in life, when we avoid stuff, you know, where's the stuff that we're really avoiding? You know, it's kind of always there. So, you know, this is one way to draw it out. And I think in the more group experiences that we've had, you know, when we use music and art, you know, to deliver psychological processes around things like teaching people about forgiveness or death or how to let go of a relationship. I think if you build it in the context of an art installation, and for example, like, you know, we held a public funeral at the Art Gallery of New South Wales. People didn't know they were coming to a funeral. People just thought, okay, I'm there because I want to let go of a relationship. And they came in, we had a full kind of funeral setting, and they were able to go through this kind of a sense of a rite of passage or a ceremony in a community setting. And I think that's very powerful, because we've lost a lot of our, you know, really beautiful rites of passage, which allow us to move through different stages of life, different
Mm-hmm.
challenges, and we're all kind of just having to figure it out on our own. But if someone was like, hey, you know, do you want to go to this death meditation thing? You're like, oh, you know, it's like at an art exhibition. You're like, yeah, cool, I'll try it out. And then, you know, what happens is they get to experience, for example, their own death or the death of someone that they love in a really safe container with music supporting that emotional journey. But then going through the process of recognizing how precious life can be through the experience of death. So, I mean, if you typically ask someone if they wanted to experience death, they probably would freak out and say no.
Yeah.
But I think in the context of contemporary art and music, you know, we can really do some beautiful things that are missing from our society.
Yeah. So this is part of Indigo X, what you're describing, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can you unpack that for me? How did that come about? And obviously this is part of the expression of it, but yeah, tell me a bit more about that as a project organization.
Yeah, so I guess Indigo X is this fusion of psychology and music. It's like, where does that meet? How does music support the journey, you know, therapeutically for someone? And how can we combine that with rite of passage and ritual and ceremony so that people on a bigger scale and in communities can go through a process that's really deep and safe. So, you know, we kind of started experimenting with this workshop called Listen Up, which ended up growing to be about, you know, every month, 60 people lying in the dark, listening to some really awesome music. Lots of Niels Fromm, you know, Nicholas Jar, you know, even post-rock, you know, just a lot of beautiful contemporary music that people wouldn't necessarily think is what you would listen to when you come to a somewhat like a sound bath experience.
Right.
So I think when you combine the experience of listening to music in the dark and really build a beautiful cathartic journey for people, I mean, that's what we found through our research, was that people could actually have a cathartic experience through the exploration of these challenging emotions. They'd get triggered, not just, you know, it wasn't a meditation. It's like, you don't have just to focus on the breath or the music. It was like, go free, you know, like let your mind roam, be in your body. I'm going to guide you, but the music is going to take you on a journey. So it's kind of like choose your own adventure. And the beauty of that was that, you know, people were kind of likening it to like a psychedelic drug experience or an experience like where they were going through a really deep personal transformation. And I guess the basis of that is like, we know that in therapy, we're not going to avoid the hard stuff. You know, we're going to go there and we're going to go to the challenging parts of ourselves and the parts of us that we disown or we don't like or that we're afraid to meet. And I guess, you know, that's the basis for Indigo X, is like, how do we bring people into the darkness so that they can find light within themselves?
Right. I love this idea that you kind of touched on before as well, of sort of giving people permission to feel the range of emotions. I think it's probably a really important thing for people to acknowledge, especially at the moment, you know, where a lot of people, like we were saying before, are just trying to stay productive or maybe feeling overwhelmed, but feeling like they have to sort of just save face or keep positive or, you know, and I think people probably need to have that permission to feel whatever it is that they're feeling and sit with it and you know, not try and rush through that.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I think that generally feeling our feelings is kind of inconvenient. You know, it's not something that really kind of slots very easily into our Google calendars, and, you know, it's not something that we necessarily look forward to. But I think when, you know, like conversations like this, when we say, gosh, you know, we're feeling kind of shitty at the moment and, you know, we're not coping how we think we might be coping, you know, and especially being a therapist, I think, gosh, I should have I should sort of have maybe got into my groove now,
Yeah.
but I'm like so not in my groove. I don't even know where and when that's ever going to be a reality. And I think when people just kind of step up and say, oh gosh, like I'm having a weird time and let's kind of do this together, it's ultimately pretty comforting to give people that permission just to be a bit messy right now.
Yeah. So what can we do to help not rush through those emotions? What are some practical things that we can actually do that will help us not, you know, maybe avoid stuff that's coming up, or not try and mask stuff with staying busy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you know, if we think about, you know, I think some people might have heard now that people are talking about this kind of collective experience of grief that we're going through. So typically, you know, people might not have expressed their kind of struggles with this idea of grief, but I think it's something that I've always been really interested in, and communicated that to people that I'm working with, that is that, you know, we go through all these cycles in life, and, you know, when we accept that life and death are like yin and yang, then we understand that not only are we all going to pass away at some point, but we're always changing. So if we look back on our lives, there's the changes in attitudes, beliefs, you know, desires, dreams, things change, and things ultimately don't always go our way. So when we think about you know, this kind of journey of grief, if we were to apply it to what we're experiencing now, even explaining to people, and to people who are listening right now, you know, it's not a one size fits all journey. You know, there are like so many different feelings that come with the kind of journey of grief, from guilt, you know, shock, denial, depression, like there's hope, there's acceptance, there's this kind of bargaining that happens. So that people, when they're experiencing these emotions, they can cycle through lots of different emotions. They can go back to the beginning and feel guilt and anger and anxiety again. And I think telling people and normalizing that experience, where you can say, like we were saying earlier, you know, like one moment you're like, yeah, you know, like it's like you forgot about what's happening, and then you kind of snap back into it and you're like, oh shit, like I'm not okay. And other times you're in more acceptance. And I think, first of all, I think it's just normalizing that experience for people, that we can't always feel everything all the time. Like I'd be in the corner, like rocking back and forth in a mess. Like we've kind of got to go flip flop a little bit on this journey towards, you know, acceptance and hope, which is sometimes we give ourselves space to feel. You know, for me personally, music has always been that space holder. So personally, headphones, Niels Fromm gets me every time. You know, it really gives me the opportunity just to sit there and allow the music to help me to process some of the emotions that I'm going through. I think it's different for everyone. You know, people express emotions through movement. Right now, we're kind of all cooped up in our houses, but we still got Spotify. We still got our record players. We still got access to pretty much every song that we could ever want. So the ability for us to find ways to move emotions and dance out our emotions in a way, it actually, you know, it's kind of cheesy, but it's actually really important, because we actually store, you know, emotions in our body, and we can actually process them through movement. Yeah, those are two really important things.
I love that. I just kind of, I guess, learning to let go as well, and let go of the idea of judgment as well, because I know, like, you know, the first thing that comes up when you say, oh, like, oh, just I'm picturing myself dancing at home alone, I'm like, cringe. But then I'm like, actually, no, it's probably totally fine. I should probably just do it. And if I'm honest, I probably do it anyway after a few drinks. So
yeah, well, you know, I think we just all have this opportunity at the moment to kind of get with ourselves, you know, and that might not be pretty and glamorous, and, you know, I know we're all hanging out in our PJs all day, you know, like not really doing our hair and all that kind of stuff. And I think we kind of just got to get with the reality of what's arising for us at the moment. And I think if we were to be completely real, it wasn't like the COVID-19 crisis all of a sudden brought all this shit upon us, and all of a sudden, you know, all these normal people were freaking out. Like, if we were to be completely honest, you know, and as a therapist for the last 10 years, we've been struggling with things prior to this as well. And the acknowledgement that it's kind of putting a bit of a spotlight on it all. It's putting a massive spotlight on basically our relationship with ourselves. Like, how do I talk to myself? You know, how am I treating myself? Am I being kind to myself? Am I being critical? Am I expecting that I should be really productive right now? That I should have a plan for the future? You know, these are all the stuff that's literally going inside my own head at the moment. Like, you know, how do I, should I be dealing with this better? Like, what am I supposed to be doing right now? And I think this is the kind of washing machine that ultimately, you know, gives us some insight into how we cope with stuff in general, before, after COVID-19, whatever. It shows us that, personally for me, you know, being productive has been something that is probably my biggest distraction from myself, you know, and, you know, just finding things to do and keeping busy and answering emails. And that's how I kind of validate myself. And when I'm not doing anything, I feel really shit about myself. And I'm like, whoa, you know, it's very kind of in my face right now that I use work and doing things for others and, just doing stuff to not have to listen to myself now.
Yeah, I'm 100% in that same boat. I'm like, just like, find a project quickly, anything to distract yourself from your own emotions. But obviously, you know, you do a lot of work with creative people, with musicians, with artists. I mean, obviously, we're all made of the same stuff, but I feel like there are maybe unique, you know, challenges that creative people face. I know that mental health is a massive issue for the creative industries, for the entertainment industry. What would you say are some of those common issues that you run into as a mental health practitioner, I guess, that come up often for you?
Well, I mean, I can definitely, like, I feel for, you know, artists at the moment because, you know, being in the middle of writing a book at the moment too, it's so painful. And I think something that unites all of us, creatives, non-creatives, is this sense of insecurity and self-doubt. Like, I've worked with some people who are like so incredible at what they do, and I see them on stage and I listen to their music and I just think, oh, you know, like, they've definitely got their shit together. And then I talk to them and they're like, I'm just like, oh, we're just so similar to each other. We absolutely freak out about the same things. So self-doubt is, I think, is huge in terms of, you know, that process of being a creative person. Is a constant, it's like being on a silent retreat all the time with yourself. You know, you're constantly seeing how you talk to yourself, like the critical, that kind of self-critical part of you. I think what we also struggle with is people's expectations of us, especially when you've got managers and labels and all of that kind of coming together. I think there's always a little bit of a fight between personal expression and like how that's going to roll out. I think that's a definite challenge in learning how to really express, you know, what is important on the journey, because I think a lot of the time, you know, I don't feel like there's rule books on all this kind of stuff. I think everyone's journey as a creative is a really unique thing. And so, you know, creators kind of going through all this stuff blindly, I think it just brings up a lot of insecurities, and we want to please people, you know, we want to be able to be the best that we can. But I think in terms of being able to set good boundaries around, you know, how we communicate with people, what is expected of us, even just when to release music, how often, you know, I think, they're definitely some of the struggles. And being on the road, I think, has been something that people talk about quite a lot, because it shifts. It's kind of like that, you know, a lot of creatives, I guess, and musicians, they probably experience a lot of what we're experiencing at the moment. Like, I've talked to artists who are like, get off a stage to like hundreds or, you know, thousands of people, and then I'm kind of by myself in my hotel room. And now what? I've kind of come off this massive high. So there's this huge fluctuations in emotions that come with people who are particularly, you know, in the public eye, that there's just this massive discrepancy. And how do you deal with that, I guess, that low that comes after releasing an album or getting off stage? Like, in, you know, I guess there's the struggle with drugs and alcohol and other kind of vices that give people a sense of maybe being able to escape some of that challenge that they're facing.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know if you've seen Elizabeth, is it Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love?
Yeah.
I'm
You read
obsessed.
the book.
I actually haven't, but she did an amazing TED talk. It's probably like 10 years old now, about the relationship between an artist and their creativity and the artist and their success, and trying to marry those two things. And she kind of ended up studying like ancient, I think, Roman culture or Greek culture, about how they had an inspiration just so that they could psychologically remove themselves from it, so they could protect themselves. But something she also talked about was this idea of like, you often, especially if you're, you know, an artist who's releasing, you know, essentially living off your art, if you're releasing records or touring and making money from it, that's kind of sustaining you. And she sort of talked about the idea of trying to flip that and really returning to the art of that thing being like a child that you're supposed to nurture and you're supposed to encourage and build and invest into, rather than expecting it to be the thing that's going to feed you and put your food on the table and give you, you know, a sense of ego, trying to flip that around. And that's something I've been really conscious of at the moment as well, as this idea of changing the relationship we have with our art. Well, you know, a lot of us are forced to, because it's not now in a position where it is, you know, going to pay the rent, or we don't have that tour anymore. We don't have that income coming in anymore. We have to change that relationship now, which is probably a really, you know, confronting process for a lot of us.
Yeah, I think there is an opportunity to potentially explore spaces of play again. And, you know, if we think about creativity, and it's kind of, if we really distill creativity down, and, you know, it's this process where essentially in the beginning there should be no right or wrong, you know, and that journey, I think, because of release schedules, because of deadlines, because of all these kind of artificial kind of, you know, spots that we've put on our journey to get to some place, I think now, which is really hard for us, I think, to deal with, is like, you're like, oh, I don't have a deadline. Like, I should be making something, and like, when is it due? Sometimes we, you know, I think we've needed that kind of kick up the arse a little bit, but now we do have that place to explore that imagination again, and to go into spaces where, you know, well, can you make music for you? And not necessarily, sometimes I think we get caught up, like even when I write my book, I'm like thinking, oh, what are people going to think of this? And what are people going to think of this? And I wonder if there's a more pure space of expression, especially now when a lot of emotions are coming up, where we can actually really explore a little bit, go a little bit deeper, go into the kind of next layer of what it means to feel something move through you and express that.
Well, yeah, what other ways do you think that there might be that artists can engage with their own creativity, or their own, or even people that maybe aren't necessarily creative, but what are ways that people could engage with, you know, their own skills and abilities to help process these kinds of emotions that might be coming up?
Yeah, I mean, personally for me, I've kind of moved into like different domains of creativity that I don't necessarily have had time, you know, in the last, you know, few years to explore. So personally for me, like, I've tried to take the pressure off my, like, I guess, typical forms of creativity. Like in the middle of writing a book now, I'm like, oh gosh, like I can't deal with that right now. Like it's putting too much pressure on myself to like get this stuff out. And I think, you know, the first thing is to kind of relinquish yourself from having to produce in the way that you normally produce. And I've been kind of switching a little bit maybe into the kitchen more, and just going, okay, well, you know, how can I make something that I can actually finish in an hour? Because this book has taken me like 2 years, and I know people have been working on albums for a long time and songs, you know, that they're never finished. So
Mm-hmm.
how can we, how can I just, express myself creatively in some other domain and sort of loosen this sort of relationship that I have, like you were saying before, with my typical form of creativity. Like, there's some books that have talked about, we kind of open a laptop or we open up our, programs, and we just expect to be creative at that point without actually asking ourselves, like, is this what I need right now? Is this, like, what is my intention behind sitting here? Is it because is this what I always do? And have I kind of look a little bit deeper to that and say, well, what I actually really need right now is to go and lie in bed and put the doona over my head and listen to music. And maybe it's time to be inspired again by other people and music that you haven't really listened to, or other forms of creativity. I think, as creative people, we can look to other forms to actually find that space where we kind of get excited to create, because I know sometimes I sit down and I'm like, I'm not always excited. And there's times where you're like, I just can't wait to get this out and to do this. And I think there's an opportunity right now for us to ignite, some of that, if we give ourselves the space to just, just kind of sit with the uncomfortable.
Yeah, I love that. The kind of just idea of, checking your intentions, and also just really practical things like just diversifying the specific kind of creativity. I'm going to try and cook a different meal instead of sending 20 emails.
Instead of toast.
Yeah, instead of toast. It might be toast with something on it. We'll see. I don't know. I might mix things up. I might fuck with the menu. Who knows? Like we've talked about a lot, I guess there is a broad sense of social anxiety, social grief across the board. I'm wondering if you can maybe help with just a couple little habits or practical things that we can just do on maybe a daily basis or throughout our week to help, bring that baseline level of stress or anxiety down. Maybe it's things like just, not checking the news so much, or little things like that we can all really easily, adopt to help our just be a bit more grounded maybe.
Yeah, so many things. I mean, the first thing is, this development, at the moment we have this kind of opportunity to develop a bit of self-awareness. And I was talking about, how do you talk to yourself? What are all these, we've got all these different parts of us right now that are kind of yelling at us and telling us we should be better or feel better or do this right now. And I think firstly, the recognition of that voice in the head, we're not always going to be self-aware. We're not always going to be able to catch ourselves thinking and feeling a certain way. But I think when we do, and we recognize that we're feeling something uncomfortable, I always say to myself, it's okay for you to feel how you're feeling right now. And I think our ability to be reassuring to ourselves, in therapy and psychology, in some modalities, we talk about this idea of an inner child that we all have. And it's the part of us that sometimes we disown and we think, oh no, like, don't be afraid, don't be anxious, or don't be silly. And we kind of talk down to ourselves. I think one of the most powerful things that we can do is to learn how to treat ourselves with a little bit more kindness by validating our own emotions, like treating ourselves as if we were, like a good friend had come and talked to us and said, God, I'm feeling really freaky, scared, all over the place, unsettled. And for us to be like, how would we talk to them? And I'd say, oh my gosh, like, I get how you're feeling. And being able to do that in a genuine way, this is something that we can actually learn how to practice now, being genuine with ourselves and forming a relationship with ourselves that is less judgmental and a little bit more compassionate. Compassion right now is an amazing thing. And so is self-forgiveness. Self-forgiveness going, it's totally okay that you just watched 6 hours of Netflix. Is that sweet? Like, fine. Like, or you just had toast 3 times yesterday. Like, just being able to be, I think, gentle with ourselves right now, because if we think about it, everything that we're doing at the moment is a coping mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not really time to kind of judge, like, that's a bad coping mechanism, that glass of wine is a bad coping mechanism, and this is a good I think right now we just got to be like, I'm coping and I'm doing the best that I can. And I think even saying that now, I'm like, I'm doing the best that I can. Oh, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be good for the next 5 minutes or so.
Yeah.
But, you know, practical things, you know, mindfulness is a really interesting tool that we can use right now, which is all about getting into the senses. So I'm drinking a lot of hot tea, you know, I'm, you know, burning incense, I've like got hand creams out, you know, things that help draw you back into the moment, into your senses, however that is. I think that's a really important thing. Moving your body, so important. Like I was saying before, we really hold our emotions in our body, and there's something about being able to go outside and take a walk in the park, even though everyone's avoiding you on the path. You know, I think that fresh air, we just got to kind of get out of some of our head spaces and really feel, you know, the sun on our face, and actually pick up the phone and have a real heart-to-heart conversation. Like, be vulnerable. Like, what have we got to lose right now? Like, literally at this point in time, maybe before we would think, gosh, I don't want to share my feelings because my friend's probably in a really good headspace. We all think everyone's like having a great time, but really everyone's having a really mixed bag of goodies at the moment. And so it's very likely that someone would be able to see you and hear you and understand you and say, yeah, me too. This is freaky.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. My kind of few takeaway things there were like, I guess, you know, trying to engage with my senses as much as possible. I'm going to drink more tea. I've burnt all the Palo Santo, I swear to God. There's none left anywhere on the planet. My house is like just a complete smoke bomb.
Yeah. I just
I love
burnt
that.
some before this.
I've got like a tiny little stub like that left on my kitchen bench now. I love those just simple mindfulness practices. I think when people think of mindfulness, they often think, I guess, really deep meditation or those kinds of things. But I love just those really small things, like just engaging with the senses in whatever way we
100%.
can or choose to as well. I love that.
Yeah, just like choosing one song and just like really listening to it from start to finish. Or for me, you know, like when we used to do it in Indigo, when, you know, we used to listen to a whole album from start to finish. And there's something about that space that you give. It's just like saying, you matter. Like, I'm going to give you the chance to just be. And I'm also, you know, I think it's actually kind of nice because we often listen to music in the background. It's always just kind of like, it's kind of there, or we don't really give it as much love and the respect I think that the artist deserves. And there's so much intention behind it, especially in these kind of concept albums. You're like, whoa, like I never knew that this is what was behind the music, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm wondering if there's any little simple mindfulness thing that we could do together now to demonstrate something for people. I don't know. Maybe there's not.
Sure. Why not? I'll put on a track, of course,
Okay.
Neil's Farm. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I can hear it.
All right. Close your eyes. And let's take 3 deep breaths together. Breathing in all the way into the belly. And nice long exhales. So breathing all the way into the body, into the chest, into the belly, into the toes. On the out breath, just feel like you're letting go of your day. Just noticing the contact of the feet on the ground. What does that feel like? Noticing the hands, how they're placed. Just relaxing the eyes, relaxing the jaw. Just noticing all the different sensations in the body. Tension, space, just letting it all be there. And just ask yourself, how am I feeling? And now we're just going to listen on purpose. Listening carefully. Noticing all the different tones. And just coming back.
I don't think I've ever closed my eyes on Instagram for that long.
It's probably weird with all these people watching you too.
I know, totally. Oh, well, it's good to get a bit vulnerable, isn't it? Oh my God, I needed that though. Thank you.
Oh, it just takes a song, some headphones, just to create that own space. It's basically, I think meditation's a little bit, can feel inaccessible to people. Mm-hmm. But I think if we just perceive it as an opportunity to spend some time with yourself.
Yeah.
Like however you are, just accepting that and just being like, okay, here I am. I think that's the best that we can do right now to develop our self-awareness, is just let all the kind of waves and ebbs and flows of emotions and thoughts come. And, this is temporary. All feelings, all thoughts are temporary. And we're definitely not the only ones that are going through all this challenge at the moment.
Yeah. That's really powerful. Amazing. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights. I really needed this conversation. I'm sure so many people have benefited from it and will be putting it online. So I'm sure lots of other people are going to get to hear it and learn some stuff and hopefully, give themselves a bit more kindness and gentleness as we move through this unprecedented time.
That word is being used way too much.
Oh, way too much. I'm just like, can anyone get a thesaurus, please? So thank you so much, Mary. Really appreciate it. Really, really appreciate it. I will also just say that, if you are out there and you're struggling with your mental health, please reach out to somebody. You're not alone, whether that's a friend, a family member, or otherwise there are, services, like the Indigo Project, which are doing online sessions, or there's even, obviously resources like Lifeline, which you can call. The number is 13 11 14. if you are struggling, please reach out.
Awesome.
Thanks so much again, Mary.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
You
Wash
too.
your hands, all those things. Thanks, guys, for tuning in.
Bye.
Bye.